Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me today on What Works Wednesday is my good friend, Ben VerWys. Ben, you and I first met in person at an XY conference, and then we started doing masterminds together, and it's gone uphill from there.
Uphill. Yeah. Yeah. It's, you're one of the ones I have the lone distinction of saying I do some of the most dangerous things I've done. And, I've had a lot of fun and continue to do good work in the practice since coming across you. And I think we'll continue to do that. So.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun last time we got together in Atlanta. We did stunt car driving. Of course, Michael Henley was there, who was on the podcast, and Micah, of course, and a couple other guys. So, yeah, that was pretty wild to do stunt car driving with Bobby Orr.
Yeah, just still one of the craziest things I've ever done.
Isn't that wild? Well, and as much fun as that was, right, it's fun to talk about. Like, it really is a fast forward for a mastermind, right? I mean, we went from having met each other once in person to now we're going through like deep financial details of our practices, net worth statements. I mean, we went straight off the deep end, and I thought it was a very productive session.
Oh, I still think, that is one of the most incredible exercises, not just having a mastermind, but doing a mastermind that way is such a unique thing because this industry is very isolating and very lonely. And even if you have other people at your firm, which I have a bunch of, that's not an experience I've been able to or replicate in any other way, nor would it even be easy to replicate it. So, yeah, it's just an incredible experience.
Yeah, I think, like you said, otherwise it's so isolating. And then when you go to conferences, you have to spend a lot of energy screening. Like, all right, is this guy or gal, are they feeding me the straight thing? Do they actually know what they're talking about? Do you think their practice really works, or are they just good with the PR machine?
Yeah. Well, and I think you and I I know you like talking to other advisors. I don't even like talking to other advisors that much, right? So it's kind of like I go to a conference and I'm the guy that's, holed up in a coffee shop somewhere because the whole getting to know you process is something I'm already doing so much with clients that I actually like. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy having conversations with other advisors, but in measured doses. And like you said, it's hard to even know who you'll gel with or who's got any similarities in their practice or similar pain points or anything. And the mastermind process really filters through all that very quickly.
I love it. Well, Ben, tell us a little bit about your practice, and then we'll jump into some of the things you and I talked about before we hit record, which is how difficult it is in our industry to either be, you almost have to be like deep in the wire W-2 side, or you have to be this crazy entrepreneur, and there's not a lot of ground in between.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into my practice. Happy to share. My upbringing was in the W-2 wirehouse world. I was at it from a very young age, helping run, spent 6-7 years at Oppenheimer, working for a top 5 advisor there on a small team, managing a large book of business. And so really, didn't cut my teeth the same way a lot of people do in the industry. I wasn't knocking on doors. I wasn't getting clients. I was servicing clients at a very high level at a very young age. Spent a little time in the insurance channel and then also in the bank channel, and then ultimately landed right as the world was ending in late 2007 at a top 5 team at Oppenheimer, and all of a sudden was thrown into the mix. And I think maybe third week on the job or so, there was a day where I think we lost like $30 million in one day, and I thought, okay, we're not in. This isn't the beginning. This isn't the early part of the industry anymore. And so, yeah, it was the early years were a lot of learning in a job role, which was good on one hand, but one of the conclusions, so I'll back up a second. I'm ex-military, and so I used the GI Bill to go to graduate school about, I guess it was probably like 4 years into my job, so to speak. I got that itch where after a few years, I'd learned to do the work really well, and we were maybe servicing 100 households, so it wasn't a lot of hours worked. and there was no ladder to climb. There was only 4 of us serving that book of business. So ultimately, it was kind of show up, do the job. And as a young advisor, I tried to assert myself in so many ways that I kind of laugh at now, right? I tried to always be the first one in and the last one out, and make sure I wore a tie. And the running joke was, if I had a tie on, was, are you interviewing for a job today? Even because there was no dress code. And so I was fitting what I viewed as the job. And then after a number of years, it became evident. I loved the work I was doing. I loved the team I was with. I loved the clients I was working with, but was sort of challenged by almost the lack of challenge. And so I did what any self-respecting, not clear-headed person with a 1-year-old baby at home would do, and went to graduate school. And that got me through a few more years. But basically, while there, the thesis project that I did and a lot of the work that I did was studying the history of the industry. And because I was pretty young, I still am. And so I wanted to understand, if I'm going to do this work for several more decades, then I really want to understand why I'm doing it, how to do it, how best to do it. There was never any other work for me. It was all I ever really wanted to do. And so I had all these questions, right? I had questions like, who came up with the 1% management fee? Or why does the average independent shop look exactly like a quasi wirehouse? There's very little, and I didn't know guys like you around the country then. I just looked around the landscape and really was challenged by the fact that there weren't a lot of options in the industry, and so particularly to do the work at a high level, the way I was doing it. And so I kind of came to this conclusion, had a bit of a sort of Jerry Maguire moment where I realized I had to do the work a certain way, and I couldn't do that work as a W-2 employee, and I didn't want to start or run a firm. So I went looking for the type of firm that I wanted to start or that I wanted to be a part of, and I couldn't find it. So I started a firm, and in the classic Michael Gerber, E-Myth type of technician role, started a firm because I had a skill set that I thought the world needed. And that was the inception of the firm that literally had no clients, no revenue, had my next child by the time I'd started this thing, and had a 1-year-old baby then. So apparently I decided to go through all of the most time consuming things with, a wife and young kids at home, and I'm a sucker for pain, I guess. And so that was my launch into this space, right? I'd been in the industry as an employee in a servicing role, primarily in the investment side, no emphasis on planning, and decided, a planning-focused RIA independent shop with a variety of differentiated focuses, that there was a real need for that, and decided to start a firm from scratch 8 years ago. No clients, no revenue, and a mortgage to pay. So
and a young baby.
And a young baby, and many other reasons not to do it. But ultimately, as we know, the world can be divided by 2 types of advisors: the ones who do the things they feel like they won't be able to sleep at night if they don't do someday, and the ones who are content to continue on as is.
It reminds me, I was at a conference just the other day, and Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach was there, and he shared this quote that I've never seen him write. I think it's one of his, he usually does more politically correct quotes, but he said, fear is like peeing your pants, and courage is what you do after you've peed your pants. And I thought that was a priceless quote.
Yeah. Dan's great.
Well, so Ben, is somebody who's seen the whole spectrum, right? You started deep on the W-2 side. Now you run this spectacular shop and everything in between. What are some kind of thoughts you would give to advisors wherever they're out on that spectrum as they're kind of looking? Is it that the grass is always greener? Is it in fact like, hey, the independent space is the best bar none? Or what's been your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, as is so often true in our world, rarely is one thing universally true for all, right? So whenever I give advice to newer advisors or younger advisors or even older advisors that are sort of maybe stuck or whatever, I always caveat this with, all I can do is tell you how we've built what we've built, and then I have tried to ascertain, I think, where some problems and logjam spots lie throughout the industry. So I'll just, I guess, anecdotally share my own journey. I thought I'd be a single man shop. I thought I'd be, if I made it to a quarter of the level of income or assets that my old team did, I would be doing incredibly well financially. And then someday I'd hire an assistant, and it was all very simple in my mind. And so that's one that's one talking point early to anyone is regardless of where somebody's at in your journey, never is it as simple as you have in your mind, or rarely is it. And in fact, one of the challenges I found, and I know you can relate to this as can so many of the other advisors we know, is if you're good at this work, opportunities will abound, right? So then it's like simplicity can get tossed out the window. You can choose to hang on to it and make it the priority. But ultimately, if you're really good at this work, there will be opportunities galore, and ultimately having to learn to focus on the things you're good at and what you really want to do. Which brings me to a second piece of guidance I give advisors all the time, which is you have to know what you're building. You don't have to, it doesn't mean you can never change what you're building, but if you'd have asked me in the early years, I'd have told you I'm building an independent RIA as a solo practice to a quasi build a lifestyle practice, though we know there was a lot of, 8 years ago, there's a lot of sort of negative association with that word. And it wasn't until I started to meet other advisors who were building really humming, high quality lifestyle practices where I realized we could toss out the negative vernacular there. And, and ultimately that was a laughable thing, because what I didn't follow my own advice, which is why it's now my advice, right? Is like, that's how it works, is you tend to learn the things that you learn the hard way and then tell people that's how they should think, right? And so my learned lesson was I didn't know what I was building, and I was open to building all these different things, and all these opportunities came along that all looked attractive and shiny. And so if you don't, one of my kind of rules in my own head as you're building a firm is if you don't know what you're building, it will build for you. So yeah, number one, if you don't know what you're building, it will build, and you will lose your choice in the matter, or your control over your choice. So I lost control over my choices early, and the firm started to scale in spite of me, because I had no interest in being that entrepreneur, firm builder, business owner. I didn't identify with any of those internal identities until years later. And the firm did start to build, and it built to 3 and then 4 and then 5 advisors. And there was all these questions that I would get frustrated with. And it's like, now it's sort of laughable to me because it's only been 8 years. It's not a very long journey, but I've already tried, in the early years, I tried to sell the firm a couple of times just to get out from under it. I didn't want to keep dealing with it. And I wanted to hire guidance so I could stop banging my head against the wall and stuff I didn't want to deal with. And at a certain point, I had a really great coach who helped me navigate some of the existential of understanding what is it you're trying to build, why are you trying to build there. And over time, I'm really glad, because if I'd had that awareness in the beginning, I might not have built what we are today, which is a 20 plus RIA, 20 plus advisor RIA that has scaled a lot of things really well. I have ultimately morphed into that advisor / firm owner. And that's a very hard dual hat role to wear. And so and now to the degree that not only do I serve in both of those roles to my firm, but I also hired an executive to run the day-to-day operations, because I realized there's no way I could continue to prioritize clients' relationships and build and scale and run a firm. And now there's a responsibility to, all in all, over 50 people from the families of the advisors who work here and the employees that we have. And so, now it's got a lot more weight and gravity to it. But I guess what it comes down to is I really feel convicted that the industry is doing a disservice still to this day to advisors by giving them sort of a binary model of be a W-2 employee at a shop, or start a firm, run it, own it, manage it, and the gap between those two to me is the Grand Canyon, right? It's it means that anybody who says, hey, I think I can build something, I want to be compensated accordingly if I'm any good at this, has to also be a firm owner and an entrepreneur. And that's one of the things we're kind of fighting against and creating an opportunity for advisors who are kind of hybrid between where they'll bet on themselves, they believe in their abilities, and they want to be compensated if they're good at the work, but they don't want to deal with compliance or operations or support or scaling or recruiting or any of those things. And so that model is sort of a built by advisors for advisors firm that I now own and run. And I still manage my client practice, but I've had to get a lot more selective there and pare that back. And so, yeah, that's the journey so far.
I love that, Ben. I love that this question, like, what am I building, right? Whenever that discussion comes up, and we'll oversimplify between the wires and the independents, it all centers around, well, what are payouts and what's the fiduciary standard and what's this and these, but none of it is, hey, what are you trying to do? Like, what are you passionate about? What is it you want to be? And Ben, to your point, no matter which path you're on, if you don't know that, it will create this life of its own, and you'll find yourself buried. And to your point on an existential question, why am I feeling so buried? Don't I have what it is I want? And turns out you didn't. You just picked a path and
I
ran down
didn't.
it.
In fact, I would say I didn't even at multiple levels, right? I didn't have the practice that I wanted. This is before I discovered surging. I didn't have the firm that I wanted, right? I didn't feel like I was providing the greatest experience for a number of years to the advisors. And I knew I wasn't. And I didn't have a great, I wasn't giving my wife and kids nearly the time they deserved, right? And so I would say I was, I wasn't unhappy. I was doing the work that I loved, and I'd already gotten to the point where I was making a pretty good income. But, on a lot of levels, it wasn't what I thought it would be. And that was surprising to me to find out.
Yeah. Well, boy, Ben, I hate to cut this one short. I feel like we're on part 1 of 7 of this story. Like, we just got our background piece, and we could go so much deeper. In fact, when we're together, we're going to be together in a few weeks as of the day of this recording, doing mastermind together. So we'll have to record a few more sessions. But Ben, what's a takeaway action item you would give advisors listening to this? And again, I'd love to go on for an hour, but unfortunately we have to cut short. But what's an action for a listener who says, wait a second, I get what Ben's saying. Like, I get this existential question and these paths, but what do I do? Like, what's the next step?
Yeah, number one, be honest with yourself about what you're building, and to the point of the mastermind, be honest with some others who understand who you are, right? And get some feedback from people. There's a lot of advisors that own independent shops that shouldn't own independent shops. Conversely, there's a lot of advisors who are stuck in W-2 land, or even if they're, broker dealer wirehouse land, where it's like the compromise and what you're giving up is so heavy that you are basically a glorified employee, even if you're a producer, right? And so the challenge is, if you can understand what your ideal life looks like and then back into it, whether it's through better efficiency through surge, or whether it's through a better arrangement. And I believe you can have all of those things now, right? I wouldn't have believed that early, but guys like you, guys like Micah, guys like Henley, myself, we're bellwethers to people who don't believe this is true. Because honestly, if you'd have told me there was a group where we'd get 7 guys together who do have their cake and eat it too, I would have thought that's fairy tale land. The life and the practices that we run today, in some respects, are like the articles I used to read about the guy who was running this firm from a sailboat in like 2005.
I remember that. Yeah.
That's a fairy tale. Like, nobody's actually doing that, right? But this stuff is so much closer than we ever realized. And so you can have that ideal life and do really great work for clients in a way that they need badly, and you can have that without backbreaking your career or your firm as well. And I think that's so important for advisors to realize today, because the industry is not presenting them with options.
I love it. Well, Ben, thank you so much for this insight into your practice. It was fun to kind of go into this kind of almost philosophical direction. But again, for all our listeners, I would recommend follow Ben's advice. Like, what are you trying to build here? And then from that, which platform or which path makes the most sense for you? So, Ben, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to doing a part 2. And of course, we'll see each other in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, can't wait.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, happy planning.